Mass migration along the Oregon Trail means that by 1840, 7 million settlers are living west of the Appalachian Mountains. But for those who had called this land home for thousands of years, the Great American Migration is a tragedy.
Learning about the Oregon Trail was learning about how great the pioneers were and how determined they were to turn the wilderness into civilization. And sitting there as an Indigenous child, knowing what that Oregon Trail did for our people and what it did to the bison, what it did to the elk and to the moose and to our medicine patches, our berry patches, it was a very difficult history. And so to celebrate the Oregon Trail and the Santa Fe Trail are really to celebrate the demise of Indigenous peoples.
Seeing crowds of immigrants headed into your homelands and headed across vital grasses and waters that you know you need to sustain yourself is terrifying. This is a migration that radically transforms the landscape. It's a seasonal migration, but the effects are year-long because of the resource devastation that immigrants wrought on the resources that Native peoples need. And really the biggest fear that Native peoples have of the immigrants is the disease that they bring. Simply thinking about positioning yourself, rather than looking toward California and Oregon, looking east. What might it be like to see a wagon train coming towards you if you're living on the plains? What might it be like to live in a place that has plenty of grass for your animals, for your horses, that has plenty of ecological resources to maintain, for example, bison herds that you might hunt? And what happens when a massive crowd of people blows through during the summer and then those grasses are decimated? So thinking about taking that perspective of people who are living in those places, Native peoples, what does that mean to our understanding of the trail? To think about switching our perspective from west to east.
More and more people seek new lives along the Oregon or Santa Fe trails. The promise of the West inspires would-be pioneers to leave their farms from as far afield as Germany, Ireland, and Scandinavia. It's a uniquely American technique of colonizing land.
This removal of Indigenous groups, the murder, the genocide of Indigenous groups to make way for settlers, to make way for these waves of immigrants to come through and claim the land, is settler colonialism.
In 1830, President Andrew Jackson begins aggressively enforcing the Indian Removal Act, moving the Cherokee, Muskogee, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw nations into foreign lands in the western United States. To thousands of natives, it is a death sentence. It becomes known as the Trail of Tears.
We often learn about the Oregon Trail and the Santa Fe Trail, but we very rarely learn about the Trail of Tears or the Long Walk. We don't hear about those other forced removals of Indigenous peoples. We were forced as Indigenous peoples through war, through famine, through biological warfare to sign treaties, and all of them were broken. We were forced to sign these treaties as a way to survive. And even then, we were subjected to removal from our traditional lands onto lands that were sometimes completely foreign to us.
Despite everything Indigenous people endured, the fight was not over.
There has been a consistent narrative that Indigenous peoples are disappearing, right? And so if we look at my own field, anthropology and archaeology, we see a long line of scholars who have pointed to language loss and culture loss and the disappearing Indian. We haven't lost the spirit of who we are because of our blood memory. Our ancestors' blood is in us. It runs through our bodies, and it connects us to where we are now. And that's what we have to remember. When we hear land back, when we hear all of these things, you're on Indigenous land, It's with that recognition of reclaiming what was ours. But it's also with restoring that, because that is part of our sacred responsibility as Indigenous peoples, as the stewards of this land, is to care for it and to make sure that it's here for the next generations.
Today, a new generation of Indigenous men and women are at the forefront of the Land Back movement.
My name is Nalin Pike, and I am St. Carlos Apache, but more specifically, I'm Chiricahua Apache. Right now, we're in a time of trying to preserve our religion, our way of life, and our language. Right now, where I'm standing is on our Apache holy site. We believe that we come from here, which is Chichilpetlagot, and this is this place, Oak Flat. For Apache people, Oak Flat is that direct connection, the corridor to our spiritual connection to our Creator. And so it's a pivotal and critical part of our spirituality as Apache people. What was taught to me by my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my grandfather, is that we were a free people. We were nomadic people, people who lived free and wild and were entwined with the earth. And when we have that connection cut off, then our people won't live. Our people won't survive. A tree can't grow without its roots.
The Apache have been fighting for their lands ever since American settlers came west.
At one point, the Apache people would allow settlers to come through Apache territory until they found gold, copper, and silver. And that is really when our people were put as prisoners of war.
In 1875, the free-moving Apache people are forced far from their traditional lands and into the barren desert of Arizona, to the San Carlos Reservation.
San Carlos was called Hell's 40 Acres because it was the 40 acres of land and a place for the worst in Arizona. And it was because there was no animals, no water, no plants.
Led by famous warriors like Geronimo, bands of Apaches repeatedly break free of the reservation to wage war with the U.S. But in 1886, Geronimo becomes the last native leader to surrender. His people continue to fight today, especially for the sacred grounds of Oak Flat, which has been taken over by a mining company.
For a couple of decades now, the area of Oak Flat and its surrounding areas has been attacked. So there are two huge mining corporations, and they created this project to mine underneath Oak Flat, which is our holy land. Right now, what I'm standing on is apparently the largest copper ore in North America. And the method of mining that they want to do is the block cave mining method. Eventually, it'll create a crater. It's going to be estimated 2 miles wide, as deep as the Eiffel Tower. Our spirituality, literally our connection to the earth is going to be extracted with the copper.
Nalin, her family, and the Apache stronghold have fought the development for the last 10 years. But the fight for survival has gone on for generations.
I was born in this fight. Me breathing, me standing here is a reminder to the United States government that they had failed in their tactics to exterminate my people. I still feel that fight, that warrior in me. It runs through my blood, and I believe that it runs through any Native child's blood, any Indigenous person who's alive. We have that fire, and I'm a firm believer that what my ancestors did for me, I should do for the future generations too.
It's amazing to see it, to see these younger generations who have no fear of the way that we had fear instilled in us of the federal government.